Eala, the phenomenon. We didn't know largely the tennis community a year ago before her run in Miami, and now it's must-see TV. And
if Eala, can keep doing well with her tennis, who knows? The sky's the limit on the court, off the court.
She represents the Philippines, which is a country with more than 100 million people, but doesn't have a lot of history in tennis, and she's really...
At Indian Wells in March 2026, the crowds for Eala's practice sessions rivaled those of Alcaraz, Sinner, and Venus Williams. BNP Paribas released a day-in-the-life video featuring her, which became the most watched content of the entire 2026 tournament by a significant margin. Prior to that, the Australian Open officials assigned her to Court 6, prompting the Filipino fans to turn Melbourne Park into a virtual hostage situation. Her press conference alone drew 196,000 viewers, overshadowing Djokovic and erasing Alcaraz from the spotlight. Navratilova, watching from the broadcast desk, even labeled the court assignment a scheduling mistake on live television.
Absolutely, and that there's a certain stepladder that you have to go through before you get to elite sports, so it starts really in high school.
Wilander had already delivered the verdict on TNT Sports, comparing her feel, her hands, and her shot-making instincts to the peak 1980s wizardry of John McEnroe. That comparison was a bombshell because McEnroe did not just dominate courts, he built cults. What Wilander confirmed is that every tournament which buried Eala on small courts, in poor time slots, or within forgotten scheduling blocks, effectively fueled the Filipino Army's next recruitment drive. John McEnroe's assessment was a revelation. Every tournament that ignored Eala's Filipino following only succeeded in making that fan base 10 times larger. James Blake admitted as much publicly, and the WTA even established an entire tournament in Manila to manage the overwhelming demand. Subscribe for forensic tennis analysis that ventures where mainstream coverage refuses to go. The full breakdown starts now. This story begins not with a trophy or a ranking milestone, but with a cue. In January 2026 at Melbourne Park, Alexandra Eala's first-round Australian Open match was assigned to Court 6. What transpired was something the Australian Open had genuinely never seen before. Hundreds of Filipino fans formed a line that snaked through the grounds, past food stalls and other match venues, stretching all the way back toward Rod Laver Arena. Many of them never made it inside, as the court reached capacity early. Those who did squeeze in stood packed into every available space, with Filipino flags covering every sightline. Chants of Laban Alex rattled the walls of a venue that was never designed to contain such energy. That day, the Australian Open broke its own single-day attendance record.
20-year-old Filipino tennis star Alex Eala has sent Melbourne Park crowds into an absolute frenzy.
We go live to 100,696 spectators across the grounds. The loudest, most chaotic corner of Melbourne Park was a small outside court where a 20-year-old from Quezon City was playing her first ever Grand Slam main draw match. Martina Navratilova, watching from the Tennis Channel broadcast desk, did not mince her words. The organizers, she said, needed to keep far more in mind where players are from and what their actual fan base looks like on the ground. Lindsay Davenport was even more direct. Eala probably needed to be on a bigger show court. And one 8-time Grand Slam champion and a 3-time Grand Slam champion were telling a major tournament on live television that it had fundamentally misread the room. The misread had precedent. Go back to March 2025 at the Miami Open. Eala entered as a wildcard ranked 141st in the world, which meant tournament organizers had every statistical reason to treat her as a footnote. She was given smaller courts, standard scheduling, and no special treatment. What followed was one of the most disruptive runs in recent WTA history. She eliminated Jelena Ostapenko, then reigning Australian Open champion Madison Keys, and then world number 2 Iga Swiatek, all in straight sets, before losing to Jessica Pegula in the semifinals. With each win, the Filipino community in South Florida multiplied visibly inside the grounds. By the time the Swiatek match arrived, the atmosphere had transformed into something Pegula would later describe with genuine surprise, saying of Eala, "She is really good, a really good tennis player. We are not going to see enough of her."
Eala is the match that I was looking at, and there's people like wrapped around the stadium just trying to get in, which is pretty crazy.
That reaction is the engine of this entire story. Where did all these fans come from? The answer is structural, not spontaneous. Over 10 million Filipinos live outside the Philippines. Approximately 1.7 million of them are based in California alone, which explains why Indian Wells 2026 looked the way it did. A substantial Filipino diaspora across Australia explains Melbourne. The Filipino diaspora is one of the largest and most geographically distributed communities on Earth, and for decades, it had no figure in global tennis to rally behind. Eala did not create this fan base from nothing. She unlocked a latent army that had been waiting without knowing it was waiting for exactly this moment. The critical point, which connects directly to what Weilander said about McEnroe, is that this army does not behave like a conventional tennis crowd. It behaves like a football crowd that wandered into the wrong sport and refused to leave. They are loud during points and vocal on errors, bringing flags, banners, coordinated shirts, and chants into venues that were architecturally and culturally designed for polite applause. At the Australian Open, Eala's opponent, Alicia Parks, admitted she was rattled not by Eala's tennis, but by the atmosphere. Parks noted that it was very difficult. She had expected it, yet she also hadn't. She was so focused on the crowd in the first set that it affected her play entirely. Parks won the match, but the crowd had already won the narrative. When Mats Wilander sat down on TNT Sports after that 2025 Miami semifinal run and searched for a comparison that could contain what Eala was doing with a tennis racket, he bypassed Federer, bypassed Navratilova, and landed on McEnroe. He said that Eala has hands given by God, and that the feel and understanding she brings to the game transcend conventional shot categories. He noted it is basically what John McEnroe did to tennis in the 1980s. That comparison matters far beyond the technical. McEnroe was not just a brilliant tennis player. He was a disruptor who brought a confrontational, electric, and personality-driven energy into a sport that prized restraint. In doing so, he forced the sport to reckon with something it wasn't ready for. The parallel Weilander drew is uncomfortable for the establishment precisely because it is accurate. Eala and the movement surrounding her are forcing professional tennis to reckon with something it genuinely was not ready for.
Alex is someone I get along very well with on and off the court. Again, another physical battle, but
The WTA's scheduling apparatus was built around a logic that prioritizes rankings and seedings. First-week match assignments flow from draw positions, not from fan demand or cultural significance. This system worked efficiently for decades because the fan base for any given player was, broadly speaking, predictable and proportional to their ranking. Eala destroyed that model. A player ranked outside the top 100 should not be selling out practice sessions, and a wildcard entry should not be generating an atmosphere comparable to a Grand Slam final. The system had no mechanism for processing what was happening. Consequently, it defaulted to its existing logic and kept making the same mistake on a loop. At the Australian Open 2026, the result was court 6 with fans locked out, followed by Navratilova's public rebuke on the Tennis Channel. Then came Dubai 2026, where Eala drew packed crowds throughout her quarterfinal run, with many spectators having traveled specifically to watch her play.
If Eala, can keep doing well with her tennis, who knows? The sky's the limit on the court.
At Indian Wells, the BNP Paribas Open posted a day-in-the-life video featuring Eala that became the tournament's most-watched YouTube content of the entire 2026 event by a significant distance. Philippe Dor, the BNP Paribas Open's executive director, told Front Office Sports, "We love every minute of it. We benefit from it. We promote it." That is a tournament director openly acknowledging that Eala's fan base is a commercial asset, not a logistical inconvenience. The contrast with the Australian Open's Court 6 decision, made just 2 months earlier, is stark. James Blake's pre-Miami 2026 interview was the clearest public admission that the sport had been operating with faulty intelligence. Speaking on the Tennis Channel, Blake referenced the 2025 Miami scheduling directly, saying he had learned his lesson that Fernandez needed to be in the stadium. A tournament director was publicly revising his entire operating philosophy because the evidence had become impossible to ignore. He addressed Eala in the same breath, saying, "The international interest in both players is so high that Miami's identity as a cultural melting pot means they need to be on center court because their fan bases are worldwide." He concluded by saying, "These might feel like home matches for both of them." The data trail behind that revised philosophy is worth examining closely. Eala's pre-tournament press conference at the Australian Open drew 196,000 views, nearly double Djokovic's and more than 6 times Alcaraz's figure on the same day. Aryna Sabalenka, a 2-time Melbourne champion, recorded 9,000 views for her pre-tournament press conference. Eala's Instagram following approached 1 million by the time the Indian Wells tournament began, more than double the followings of players ranked significantly above her, including Pegula, Keys, and Anisimova. These are not vanity metrics, they are demand signals, and they were visible to anyone who chose to look at them. The Australian Open chose not to look and paid for it with Navratilova's very public verdict. Novak Djokovic, who has more experience than almost anyone alive with what it means to generate polarizing crowd energy, called the situation around Eala's fan base a good problem to have. Andy Roddick said, "It is the type of story you cheer for because it is simply great for tennis." Coco Gauff, who defeated Eala in the 3rd round at Indian Wells, acknowledged the crowd dynamic with a maturity that impressed observers. After that match in Dubai, Gauff addressed the pro-Eala crowd directly, thanking Alex for bringing a new demographic into the sport entirely.
I wasn't able to win that same way because she started to play more aggressive, go for her shots a little bit more, So
that is a world number 4, one of the most celebrated young players in the game, crediting a lower-ranked opponent for expanding the audience of tennis in a way that she herself had not managed. Tommy Haas, the tournament director at Indian Wells, offered perhaps the most revealing institutional response of all. He stated that having all the Filipino fans coming to support Eala was fantastic and that you want that new atmosphere in your event. That framing new atmosphere is the key phrase. What Haas was acknowledging, without saying it explicitly, is that the Filipino Army represents something the sport has not previously possessed, a non-traditional tennis nation mobilizing at an elite-level volume. Tennis has always had passionate national fan bases, Spain behind Nadal, Serbia behind Djokovic, or Switzerland behind Federer, but those nations carry decades of professional success and established infrastructure into their support. The Philippines had none of that. Eala built the fan base in real time from scratch while simultaneously building her own career, and the two curves are feeding each other. The WTA's creation of the Philippine Women's Open, announced in November 2025 and held in January 2026, is the most concrete institutional acknowledgement that this movement has permanently altered the geography of the sport. The event was the first WTA-sanctioned tournament ever held in the Philippines. Tickets for the final sold out before Eala had even confirmed her participation. It is not so much a tennis story as it is a cultural phenomenon wearing tennis clothes. Eala herself has been measured and precise about what she thinks is happening.
So I think those back and forths were really intense for me, and I'm happy.
I think those back and forths were really intense for me, and I'm happy that. On Andy Roddick's podcast, she described the moment in 2026 when she finally accepted that the scale of support was real, saying that every week they just kept coming and she had to accept it, absorb it, and understand she was in a genuinely good position. She added that she does not know how long it will last, so she is trying to enjoy it while it is happening. The 2-0-year-old, at the center of the most significant fan mobilization in recent WTA history, is approaching it with more strategic clarity than most of the tournament directors who have been scrambling to accommodate her. The Wilander-McEnroe comparison was never just about tennis technique. It was about what happens when a player arrives who operates outside the established vocabulary of the sport, someone whose presence reorganizes the room before they even pick up a racket. McEnroe did that in the 1980s through personality and genius in equal measure. Eala is doing it through a combination of genuine talent and a nation of over 115 million people that had been waiting for exactly this signal. Each scheduling error, each small court assignment, and each overlooked slot fed the same outcome. The Filipino Army does not shrink when it is ignored. Navratilova delivered the verdict on live television, and Blake walked it back in a pre-tournament interview. The data had been visible the entire time. The sport had its warning signs but chose not to read them. Heading into the European clay season with the French Open on the horizon, every tournament director on that circuit is looking at their scheduling spreadsheet with a question they did not have last year. Where exactly do we put Eala? And what happens to our ticket sales if we get it wrong? If this breakdown gave you something the highlight reels did not, the structure behind the phenomenon, the institutional failures, and the data trail that explains why this movement keeps accelerating, then subscribe. Every week, this channel covers tennis at the level it actually deserves: forensic, verified, and built for fans who already know the sport and want to understand what is happening beneath the surface. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay ahead of every story before the mainstream catches up.